Congressman, District 4, my congressman in Chesapeake, Randy Forbes. Also, he also sits on the Judiciary Committee and the Armed Services Committee, key members there. Congressman, great to have you with us.
John, it's always good to be with you.
Now, I know you're fired up about Barack Obama's speech tonight, and you're going to be on the edge of your seat. Tell our audience, Congressman, what is it that frustrates Randy Forbes about Barack Obama the most?
John, I think the most frustrating thing is he had so many great opportunities when he came in. He was the first African-American president. He had an opportunity to really kind of heal this country, unite us, pull us together, and he decided instead to be a divider. And so what you see, and you will see this really coming out tonight based upon the Chief of Staff of the White House, this won't be a State of the Union speech. This is going to be a political speech. And, John, we all know now there are two roads this country can travel, and 68% of the people in the country feel that we're heading down the wrong road, and there will be choices here. And I think each time he comes to a fork in the road, he's picked the wrong choice. So, for example, if we have a choice as a nation of protecting our borders or protecting a Syrian refugee program that's flawed and not vetted, he will choose the Syrian refugee program. If it comes to a choice between focusing on the weight of terrorists at Guantanamo Bay or the weight of our veterans at VA hospitals where they're so poorly administered they're not getting the care they need, he's going to focus on Guantanamo Bay. If it comes to a situation where we can focus on the harm of those who want to do us harm and try to stop them, or focus on law-abiding citizens and dismantling our military, he's going to focus on the latter. And he's, as you know, he has disarmed our military by 25% since he came in office, according to a recent Heritage study. And the bottom line, John, is we have an opportunity now of making a decision. Are we going to divide America to try to get more of what the president wants? Are we going to try to unite America to get more of what America needs? He constantly chooses the wrong road for this country, and he's done it so often, and the administration has done it so often to the left. They now truly view middle America as the extreme.
When you say that, it does ring true, Congressman, especially I was having this conversation a couple of minutes ago with Dr. Rob Whitman from the 1st District, that you really look at the Democrat Party now and the success that Bernie Sanders is having. And there's some of what Sanders says about Wall Street, I think, that resonates. But, I mean, basically, this is a socialist running for president in the United States, gaining huge Democratic crowds, moving Hillary Clinton way to the left, and kind of defining their race. And, I mean, when did you ever think that in this country a socialist could be gaining this amount of traction?
Well, there are two big reasons. The left focuses on two major things, despite all of the specific issues that they have. The first major thing is that in Washington, you have some smart people who know more about what should happen than the American people, and so it's incumbent upon you just to force that from Washington all the way down, whether it's across-the-board curriculums, whether it's who should have constitutional rights, whether it's who should be imprisoned or not imprisoned, whether it's what the economy should be, what kind of health policy that you have for your health insurance. And on the other side of the spectrum, most Americans believe, rightly so, that those ideas and those philosophies should come from the bottom up. And that is a huge difference. And the second thing is that the left is believing, and has always believed, is that the end justifies the means. So they don't care how they have to change the law, whether they throw the rule of law out or not. They're willing to impose it on the American people. And so what you see with Bernie Sanders is taking threads of truth, but they weave it into a tapestry of falsehood that basically would lead this country down a path where America would not be the America that most of us grew up in, or the America that can give birth to the hopes and dreams of so many young people that are coming out that deserve to have those dreams and at least the opportunity to fulfill them.
Congressman, I just want to ask you a point-blank question. This president has another 12 months. He's accountable right now to no one, certainly not the voters of America. What's the biggest risk?
Biggest risk is the same risk it was when he came in, and that's the risk to our national security, because that's something that could happen now. But more importantly, John, as you and I have talked about before, national security is not a faucet. You can't just turn it on and turn it off. And so much of the harm that he has done to us internationally and also to our military, we can't just turn that back on when you get a new president, regardless of who that president is. So the big concern that I see that dwarfs everything else is the lack of American leadership across the world now that's created an incredibly volatile situation that could ultimately make everything else kind of pale in comparison.
You look at the shooting in, where was it, Philadelphia over the weekend. Basically, you had a police officer assassinated or attempted assassination by a self-proclaimed jihadist. You know, the mainstream media really didn't pick this up. And what people are starting to get concerned. What level of cells do you think are out there, or these, I guess, jihadist Muslim extremists that are in the United States that are willing to assassinate people?
Well, there are two things that always happens, John. It's one of the reasons why, when the president comes out, it sounds noble when you say we don't want Americans fighting or being involved in conflicts around the world, because none of us want that. But what's not very noble is when he forgets to say that if we're not stopping them in these other places around the world, they will ultimately come here. And so there's two things that happen. Not only do you have this training and reinforcement and things that are happening that can help create networks from other parts of the world coming to the United States, but then as you see them constantly appearing to win because there's no pushback and there's no real strategy to stop them in other parts of the world, that spawns a lot of independent activity that can take place in the United States, which can be just as dangerous to us as the orchestrated activity can be. So I'm worried about both of those. So
going forward here with this president, he's not willing to really commit further involvement than he has. We're still dropping these bombs. We're bombing things that there's no people at. I mean, this is another one of the old untold stories. All these bombing missions that we send out in Iraq and Syria, our fighters are being told the things they can't bomb, and anything that's strategic that would make sense for us. If there's civilians there, they're told those are off limits. So basically they're bombing a lot of empty warehouses and stuff. I mean, this is just reality. So how do we reconcile this?
Well, you can't reconcile it. What you have to realize is the same thing most world leaders have realized at this particular point in time. President Obama is not going to become the world leader that we had hoped he would become in the next 11 months or so. And the world understands that, and the world knows that. What we have to focus on as a nation is trying to make sure we're rebuilding our military so that we have the options there for a new president when they come in to develop the kind of strategies that will help the United States once again be on the world stage to fill some of these leadership vacuums around the globe. Because, John, if we don't fill them, then bad actors will fill them, and they will have repercussions to the United States that none of us want to have.
Congressman, here's the good news with redistricting. Ann and I are still in your district, although we did have to check it out. I guess that's the good news for us. The bad news is if this stands, the new district lines, Barack Obama carried this with 61, almost 62% in 2012, makes it a little more challenging, shall we say, to say the least. What's going to happen here?
Well, John, I'm confident the Supreme Court's going to conclude that the overreach of these two judges was not only not appropriate, but that it wasn't legal. And I'm going to tell you a shocker, but, a shocker to you is that if you read our local paper, you're not going to get all the facts. And, here are the facts that, there were two judges on this panel that wrote this opinion. What you don't hear covered was that a federal appellate judge, Judge Payne, wrote an opinion that said that what they did was not only not required, It wasn't legally permitted. And these judges have just done such an overreach on, kind of the political leanings that they had, that I think the Supreme Court's going to come back and say, no, that's just a bridge too far, and you can't do that. The court has already said they're going to hear it. We're just to wait and see what the Supreme Court says.
And then in the meantime, we talked to Rob Whitman earlier, as I said, and he said the Republicans in the House have filed a motion for a stay until the Supreme Court decides, which will be sometime before June, obviously. And he was saying that they should get a result from that stay by the end of the week, perhaps.
Well, I don't think by the end of the week, but probably within the next 2 weeks anyway.
So within the next 2 weeks, and if they get the stay, then it just continues on as it is right now. You wait for the Supreme Court to rule. But let's say, just so our audience understands, and I do agree with you that the local coverage has not been, shall we say, candid. Okay, how about that?
That's an understatement.
I'll go politically correct here for a minute. It has not been forthright by any means. But if the Supreme Court looks at it and says, hey, this thing is just ridiculous, this is out, well, that still doesn't solve it, because there's another judge that said that it's unconstitutional as it is. So then what would happen? I mean, if the Supreme Court said you can't do that plan, what happens?
Well, the Supreme Court could very easily say that the original plan was a valid plan. I mean, let's look at the facts on the original plan. Once again, you don't get through. You had that by the elected officials of Virginia, both the House and the Senate passed this plan. Then, in addition to that, the governor of Virginia signed this plan. And in addition to that, the Barack Obama Justice Department approved this plan. So this was a plan that all of them approved. And, if you listen to most of the attorneys that analyze this, what these justices did, or two judges did, has never been done. I mean, this is totally new ground where they've had to basically rewrite the law. And even doing that, if you assumed that they were correct, that somehow the House of Representatives, the Virginia Senate, the governor, and the Obama Justice Department were all wrong, the remedy that an appellate judge can do is to simply correct the constitutional flaws, which would be to, make the minor adjustments that they thought were appropriate. This court brings in this professor from California and basically says, okay, you rewrite the districts, and he rewrote districts and totally overreaching. So it's both of those two things, I think, will be before the Supreme Court ultimately to say, wait a minute, this is just a bridge too far.
Well, and it seemed like when they did this, it just seemed like the objective was to create another Democrat district. I mean, when I looked at it, that was the first reaction I had. I don't think I'm by myself in that.
Well, I mean, you I think pointed it out very correctly. I mean, we hear all of the arguments about alleged gerrymandering that can take place, and you got districts that are 1 or 2 percentage points off. They draw a district that's basically 20 some points different, and everybody thinks, at least the left thinks that's great, that's okay, because 2 people drew it instead of 140 people drawing it from the General Assembly, the governor, and the Justice Department at the Obama Justice Department. So that's why I think the Supreme Court's going to come back and say, wait a minute, you can't do that. And that's the great system we have of government here, checks and balances, that when you get to these judges that overreach, you got a Supreme Court that hopefully can pull them back in line.
Well, look, I think your argument is strong, and based on what you just said, it sounds like they're going to take the Supreme Court is going to take a very, very deep look at this, because there's ramifications, Congressman, right? I mean, if the Supreme Court either if they decide, okay, that's fine, I mean, it's going to affect districts all over the United States.
Yeah, that's what you have to realize. These judges rewrote the law. These 2 judges rewrote the law
for the country.
So it would change redistricting across the country,
and then you'd be in complete chaos. And I think the other argument that I'm glad that you brought out is that this was approved and signed off by Eric Holder and Obama's Justice Department at the time. So obviously, Obama's Justice Department thought it was legal. Otherwise, they would have objected to it, right?
Absolutely, because they had every interest in the world in trying to object to it. And the other thing is, the plaintiffs, even in this case, they waited 2 years before they even brought a case. It wasn't like they said, there's some huge problem. And the reality of these things is that, across the country, they file these suits because it's a way that they can try to pick up seats by changing the district lines when they're not doing it at the election polls.
All right, sir. I think you're going to prevail. We want to thank Congressman Randy Forbes for being with us, Republican District 4, Virginia. More info, go to forbes.house.gov. We'll see you next week. Thank you, Congressman Forbes.
Thanks, John.